Hey everybody, JCB here at the Awesomist, and you're watching the Awesomist Explains. A few weeks ago, I posted a video on this channel called Why Not Ghostbusters, in which I outlined a few non-sexist reasons why the Ghostbusters franchise should have been left alone. In the video, I used footage from the trailer to make a couple of points, but the one that bothers me now and the one I'm getting emails and comments about is the fact that the trailer framed the whole movie as a sequel. This title card right here at the start of the trailer is designed to fool Ghostbusters fans into thinking this movie preserves the legacy of the first two films and adds to it with a story of its own. This has since, of course, been revealed to be false. This movie's not a sequel, but a reboot in a universe in which the first two films never existed at all. Even Melissa McCarthy, who stars in the new film, admitted the title card at the start of that trailer was stupid and misleading. So the question that comes to my mind is this: are the marketing people at Sony stupid or just assholes? Because there's a big difference between a sequel and a reboot. Heck, there's a big difference between a remake and a reboot. And since I plan on making Why Not a somewhat regular series on this channel in which I'll discuss many different films, I feel it's important to clearly define what these words mean and how they should be used, even if these definitions are ultimately only ever applied to my own channel. Marketing people clearly don't care about what these words mean as they throw them about as if they're interchangeable, but they're not. We saw this with the early marketing of The Force Awakens. It was first advertised as a reboot because reboot was a hot new word at the time, and because it was a word people could use to make studio executives feel like the project was new and fresh, and in this case, a clean break from the prequels. But The Force Awakens isn't a reboot. It's part 7 in a 9-part saga. Did it reinvigorate the franchise? Yes. Did it introduce new characters with new story arcs to explore? Yes. But it also featured pre-established characters and storylines from the original trilogy, or a rich tridge if you want to annoy everyone on the internet, which I do. But before I get too ahead of myself, let's go through these words one by one and define them properly. And let's get the easiest one out of the way first. Prequels are movies that are made after the original film in the series but take place at a previous point in the timeline. Some notable examples include the Hobbit films, which were made years after the Lord of the Rings trilogy completed, but take place beforehand. And then there's these monstrosities, which I like to pretend took place in Obi-Wan Kenobi's fever dream the morning Luke showed up outside his house. Then there is Rogue One, which takes place in between episodes 3 and 4. Now you may be thinking, wait, isn't Rogue One a spin-off? And you wouldn't be to blame for thinking that, as once again the marketing idiots in charge of promoting the film are tap dancing around the word prequel by refusing to call this one. You see, just as reboot was a hot new word to use a few years ago, the word prequel has been forever ruined, and marketing people will refuse to use it until the end of time. I wonder why. But Rogue One is a prequel. It takes place as part of the same story as episodes 4 through 6, but it happens at an earlier time. If you don't know anything about Rogue One, it's actually about the mission to steal the plans of the Death Star that happens right before episode 4, making this technically a Star Wars prequel. So then what is a spin-off, you ask? Well, imagine a Star Wars movie that takes place in the same universe, but is completely unconnected from any of the other previous stories we've seen in other movies. That would be a spin-off. The time placement wouldn't matter much, because it would be completely disconnected from any previously established storyline, maybe taking place on a planet we've never seen before. It would also have to have an entirely new cast of characters and locations to depend on, with only the basic lore and universe of the Star Wars saga to borrow from. And that's kind of a movie I'd like to see. That's not to say you can't take a character from a film and give them their own spin-off. A lone character can serve as a connection to the original films while still allowing the movie to develop its own story and character arcs unrelated to the original trilogies. Remember Jurassic World? That was more of a spin-off. It definitely wasn't a reboot because it picked right up in the same established universe decades after the first movie, keeping all of that backstory intact. Reboots start over. It even had a single character from the first film to tie this new set of characters and story to the existing universe. That's a spin-off. They called it a soft reboot because, again, that was the buzzword at the time, and because they were trying to correct the franchise after the less than stellar sequels did their damage. But if anything, it's a soft sequel because it doesn't pick up where the characters or story left off after any previous film, just where the film's universe left off as a whole. So yeah, Rogue One is probably a prequel. I could be wrong, I mean I haven't seen the movie yet, but just because Rogue One is probably a Star Wars prequel doesn't mean it will be bad. Heck, it might reclaim the word and make it okay to use again. So if The Force Awakens isn't a reboot, what do you call a new film in a long dormant franchise that is designed to reinvigorate the property while introducing it to a new generation, all without pissing off the original fans? Well, thankfully we already have a word for a movie like that. It's called a fucking sequel. Sequels are a continuation of the original film story in sequential order. For example, Breakin', and Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo, or Star Wars Episode 6 Return of the Jedi, followed by Star Wars Episode 7 The Force Awakens. And yeah, there was a 30-year gap in between the films, but who cares? There was a 16-year gap between Godfather Part 2 and the less than stellar Godfather Part 3, and there was 22 years between these two vacation films. Sure, there were other vacation films in between, but this too was a sequel. They called it a reboot because they had hoped it would spawn an all-new set of sequels starring Ed Helms, but the fact that Ed Helms plays a grown-up Rusty, and the fact that Chevy Chase reprises his role as Clark Griswold, means this is a sequel. Why is this such a difficult concept for people to understand? If this is a reboot, it would require new actors to play the existing characters of Clark Griswold and his family. This is clearly a sequel. I mean, you can't even call it a spin-off because this is a continuation of the same family story. You know, it's been 9 years since the last True Born film. The new movie is certain to reinvigorate the franchise and introduce the character to a new audience, but that doesn't make it a reboot. My point is the time between films doesn't matter, just that the characters and stories from the previous films carry over to the next. Having the same actors playing the same characters is a nice touch as well, but the fact that Ed Helms is suddenly playing Rusty doesn't change the fact that it's a sequel. Hell, a lot of people have played Rusty over the years. And the fact that they replaced the actors who played Johnny Cage and Sonya Blade didn't make Mortal Kombat 2 any less of a sequel, it just made it less of a movie. That movie really was terrible. Anyway, sequels continue the story and character arcs from the previous film, and it doesn't matter if the new one's terrible or if it's been a long time since the last one, or in this case both. Now it's time to discuss reboot versus remake, and I want to tackle these two together because they are the most often confused. It's important to remember that while they are similar, they're different. A reboot is exactly what it sounds like, it's a do-over. The term was actually borrowed from computer terminology. Whenever your computer crashes, you reboot, and you get to start over. Sure, you've lost all your progress up until that point, but hopefully you can avoid the same mistakes that got you into this mess in the first place. This same kind of idea has been applied to movies. When your Incredible Hulk film stops working, you reboot and try again. When your Spider-Man franchise stops working, you reboot and try again. Reboots typically sweep the old film franchise under the rug of history and try to start over again. And typically that's why reboots tend to focus on film franchises that have more than one movie. By the way, can I do a little aside here for a moment? The word franchise is not strictly interchangeable with the word trilogy or series or any other word that implies more than one. Though it certainly works in that context, franchise as a word is more accurately comparable to the word brand. For instance, Titanic can be considered a movie franchise even though they only made one movie. Why? Well shit, it spawned a whole industry of unrelated Titanic merchandise. These products only sell because of their association with the movie. When the name can be licensed for any cheap piece of crap the masses will buy, you have yourself a franchise. Anyway, back to reboot versus remake. As I was saying, reboots are designed to recreate an entire franchise, products and all, as opposed to remaking a singular movie. Batman is actually a great example of this. The Batman storyline has been redone so many times, nobody is upset when a new actor takes on the role. Unless they're convinced the actor can't pull it off. My point is it's the character that matters, and Batman's been redone so many times that it no longer matters what they do with it, and there's no one actor tied to the character itself. The character is similar to James Bond in this way. The Batman films of the late 80s and 90s all followed one another as a series of loosely connected sequels, but after the disaster of Batman and Robin, the series was rebooted to give it a fresh start under the direction of Christopher Nolan, who gave us one fantastic Batman film and two okay Batman films. Basically, reboots are made to wipe the slate clean so they can start a whole new series of films based on this new beginning. That's what the new Ghostbusters movie hopes to do if it doesn't flop. The problem I think most people have with this idea is that Ghostbusters was a good movie, and even the sequel, while not fantastic, only fails in comparison to the impossibly high standards set by the original movie. Reboots are typically done because there is some fundamental problem with the current franchise. Maybe the film flopped. Maybe the director made some goofy, unredeemable choices. My point is, reboots are generally done on franchises that have screwed up and require a fresh start before audiences will even give it a second chance. I don't think any studio would try to do a sequel to Mortal Kombat 2. Odds are they would reboot it and start fresh with a story that can last longer than one film and not immediately nosedive into terrible CGI dragon fights. So that covers reboots. Remakes, on the other hand, are a tribute to the original. The purest example of a remake is the 1998 version of Psycho, which was literally a shot-by-shot recreation of the film. Very little was changed in the 1998 version, as the director just wanted to recreate the same movie with different actors. And while the film didn't quite live up to its original inspiration, this is the purest example of a true remake. It wasn't designed to sweep the original under the rug of history or kickstart a new series of films, but to encourage a new generation to go back and watch the movie that inspired it. 2001's Ocean's 11 is a type of remake we're more used to seeing. It's more of a modern take on the original than a shot-by-shot recreation. But again, it's not not intended to replace the original so much as it's meant to honor it and share the story with a new audience. It takes the same characters and the idea of the original film, but reinvents it in a modern setting to make something new yet true to the spirit of the original film. Typically, remakes are only concerned with redoing a singular film for the sake of bringing a renewed focus to an old story, while allowing filmmakers who are fans of the original play around with the story they know and love. Oddly enough, while the 1960 original Ocean's 11 was only a one-off film, somehow the remake spawned two largely unnecessary but still fun sequels. Another more modern example of a remake is The Day the Earth Stood Still. This remake was made to update a classic story with a new global threat. The original film was a response to the nation being on the brink of war with the Soviet Union. The remake was a response to global warming. Both films sought to focus the nation's attention on a growing threat, but ultimately both films had a lot of problems trying to tell a compelling story. So just to recap, a prequel tells an earlier part of an existing storyline. A sequel is a continuation of an existing storyline. A spin-off is a separate storyline that takes place in the same universe as an established franchise. A reboot is a do-over designed to restart the storyline from scratch and correct any flaws the original might have had, like humor or chemistry apparently. And a remake is the retelling of a singular story for the sake of preservation or as a labor of love. So now that we've clearly defined these words, let's try not to confuse them going forward. And if we can get Hollywood's marketing people to cooperate, that would be fantastic. Maybe then they'd stop looking like a bunch of stupid assholes that move from buzzword to buzzword. Anyway, those are my definitions that I'll be using going forward with this channel and my Why Not series. What are your thoughts on the whole remake versus reboot versus sequel topic? Do you find it annoying when studios try to trick you into seeing their movie? Let me know down below. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe as I release new videos every week. And until next time, keep being awesome.